It was the spring of 1945. Europe lay in ruins, and the Reich was collapsing under the weight of its own delusion. Yet amid the chaos, a whisper began to circulate among Allied intelligence units. A train, deep in German-held territory, was carrying the last treasures of the Third Reich. Gold, art, priceless jewels, looted from across a continent in flames. The train had a name whispered with both awe and disbelief: Hitler's Gold Train. The story began in the closing weeks of World War II, as Nazi Germany faced inevitable defeat. In Berlin, the Reichsbank was dismantled piece by piece. Its reserves of gold bars, foreign currency, and plundered valuables were loaded onto convoys destined for safety in the south and east. The SS, acting under direct orders from Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary, took control of the shipments. Their mission: to hide what remained of the Reich's wealth from advancing Allied and Soviet forces. As the Red Army swept through Poland and the Balkans, Allied intelligence intercepted radio chatter from retreating Wehrmacht units mentioning a special train traveling west from Breslau, modern-day Wrocław. The train was reportedly bound for an undisclosed destination within the Sudeten Mountains, an area riddled with tunnels, mines, and hidden fortifications. British intelligence immediately took interest. These reports aligned with earlier decrypts from Bletchley Park suggesting that Nazi gold movements were being coordinated by the SS Reich main office under a program known as Vermögensschutz, asset protection. On March 24, 1945, a memo crossed the desk of Lieutenant Colonel Charles Beaumont at the War Office's Special Operations Executive, SOE. The directive was concise: confirm or deny the existence of a Reichsbank transport train operating under SS protection east of the Oder. Priority high. Beaumont, a veteran of clandestine logistics operations in North Africa, assembled a small intelligence cell to sift through the fragments of radio intercepts, field reports, and testimonies from captured German officers. But time was running out. The Soviets were advancing on Breslau, and the British knew that if the Red Army reached the supposed train before they did, the gold, and whatever intelligence it contained, would vanish behind the Iron Curtain. The political stakes were immense. Beyond the value of the treasure itself, the cargo may have included documents detailing Nazi foreign accounts, collaborators, and secret negotiations, information both dangerous and valuable in a post-war world already dividing into East and West. In early April, a second piece of intelligence arrived from an unexpected source. A Polish resistance fighter named Jan Nowak, operating near Wałbrzych, reported seeing German railway workers under SS guard sealing off an underground tunnel near Ksya's castle, a site known to have been under heavy Nazi construction for months. A convoy of trucks arrived at night, he wrote. They unloaded crates, heavy, like gold. Then they sealed the tunnel. The next day, everyone was gone. His report was passed to British intelligence through the Polish government in exile in London, reinforcing growing suspicions. To the British, the implications were staggering. If the rumors were true, then the train carried not only plundered wealth but perhaps the Reich's last strategic reserves. A covert retrieval mission was quietly discussed at the SOE's Baker Street headquarters. The operation would require speed, precision, and absolute secrecy. Officially, Britain was preparing for peace. Unofficially, its intelligence network was preparing for one last mission: not to fight an enemy, but to seize what that enemy had tried to bury. The mission, code-named Operation Eclipse, would be formed under the cover of advancing Allied occupation efforts. It was to be handled not by regular forces, but by a specialized unit accustomed to intelligence gathering and rapid assault, the 30 Assault Unit, originally created by Commander Ian Fleming of Naval Intelligence. These men had raided enemy bases across Europe, capturing codebooks, maps, and advanced technology. Now, they would be tasked with hunting a ghost train hidden beneath the earth. One of the men chosen to lead the mission was Major Alastair Hargreaves, a quiet, disciplined officer with a reputation for getting results in impossible conditions. Hargreaves had served in North Africa and Sicily, coordinating intelligence operations behind enemy lines. His orders were clear: locate the train, secure its contents, and ensure no Soviet interference. If it exists, Beaumont told him, bring it home. If it doesn't, make sure no one else finds it first. As Hargreaves studied the fragmentary intelligence, he realized the scale of the challenge ahead. The Sudeten region was crawling with both retreating German units and advancing Soviet patrols. Entire rail networks had been destroyed by bombing, bridges collapsed, and records lost. To find one train, even one loaded with gold, in the chaos of a dying empire would be like finding a single bullet on a battlefield. Still, the order stood. Within a week, Hargreaves and his men were on the move, equipped with minimal paperwork, false identification, and authorization that existed only in whispers between departments. What they sought was worth millions. But what they might uncover, or lose, could reshape the early balance of the post-war world. As the unit crossed into occupied Germany, smoke still rising from its shattered cities, they followed the faintest traces of steel. A rumor turned into a mission. Somewhere ahead, beneath the mountains of Lower Silesia, the gold train waited, or perhaps it had already disappeared into history. By April 1945, Germany was collapsing on every front. But in the shadows, a few final Nazi operations continued, designed not for victory, but for preservation. One of these operations was the transport of the Reich's looted treasure aboard a heavily armed train somewhere in Lower Silesia. Its rumored destination, a secret complex buried within the Sudeten Mountains. For the British, the intelligence was too compelling to ignore. The newly formed covert operation, codenamed Eclipse, was assembled at a temporary command post near Brussels. Major Alistair Hargreaves, leading officer of the 30 Assault Unit, reviewed the fragmented intelligence reports spread across his desk. The documents included Polish resistance testimonies, captured Wehrmacht messages, and decoded signals from Bletchley Park. Each piece pointed to a pattern, a gold-laden convoy that had departed from Breslau in mid-April under SS Guard, with no record of arrival anywhere in the Reich's surviving territories. The 30 Assault Unit, often called Ian Fleming's Commandos, had been created to recover high-value intelligence assets before enemy forces could destroy or capture them. They were the first to enter Cherbourg, Brest, and Trondheim, seizing codes, radar schematics, and V-weapon data. But Eclipse was different. This was not about technology or documents. It was about wealth and power, buried beneath the wreckage of Nazi Germany. Hargreaves' detachment, consisting of 12 men, included demolitions experts, a railway engineer, a signals officer, and 2 Polish-speaking interpreters. Their cover story was simple: a technical survey unit attached to British Control Commission forces, sent to secure war infrastructure before the Soviets could exploit it. In reality, their orders came directly from the SOE and the British Treasury's secret department dealing with looted assets. On April 22, 1945, Hargreaves convened his men in a dimly lit farmhouse outside Cologne. "We're going after something the Reich didn't want found," he said, pointing at a worn map. Somewhere between Breslau and Wolbschik, a train vanished. SS transport, no return signal, no wreck reported. "The Soviets are closing in from the east. We'll move from the west. Our job is to find it first, and to make sure whatever's inside doesn't end up in Russian hands." The men listened in silence. They were veterans of the war's darkest operations, used to secrecy, used to danger. Yet this mission carried a strange air of uncertainty. There was no clear enemy, no defined front. Only rumors, and the faintest trail of steel leading into the mountains. Crossing the Rhine in late April, the team moved in 2 jeeps and a Bedford truck marked with British Field Supply. They carried Enfield rifles, Sten submachine guns, and a single Bren gun for defense. Their railway engineer, Lieutenant William Cartwright, pored over captured German maps that showed freight lines disappearing into the Sudeten foothills, many of which had been rerouted or sealed in the final months of the war. If they hit it, Cartwright noted grimly, they used mining routes. The whole region's a maze of tunnels. By April 28, the team reached the outskirts of Jelenia Gora, once known as Hirschberg. The town had been heavily damaged by Allied bombing and Soviet artillery, but its railway yards were strangely intact. Through cautious questioning of locals and displaced railway workers, the British learned that a large train had indeed passed through in early April. It was marked with SS insignia, heavily guarded, and traveling at night. Then, nothing. One witness, a Czech railman named Pavel Ruzicka, described the scene. They had trucks unloading crates, he recalled. The crates were marked with the Reichsbank seal. Some men spoke of gold bars and paintings. Then the next morning, the tracks eastward were blasted with dynamite. No train returned. Ruzicka's testimony was noted carefully. To Hargreaves, it confirmed two things: the train had existed, and it had been deliberately hidden. In the days that followed, the team followed the trail southeast toward Wałbrzych, guided by reports from the Polish underground. Villagers described columns of SS engineers moving through the forests, hauling machinery and explosives. The name, Książ Castle, surfaced repeatedly, a sprawling 13th-century fortress that had been seized by the Nazis in 1944 and converted into a subterranean construction site under the command of Organization Todt. Historical records later confirmed that Książ and its surrounding tunnels were part of Project Reis, a vast, secret network of underground complexes built in the Owl Mountains. Their purpose remains one of the enduring mysteries of the war. Some historians believe they were designed as headquarters for the Third Reich's final command. Others suspect they were intended as storage for weapons, documents, or treasure. As the British unit approached the area, the situation grew increasingly perilous. Soviet vanguard patrols were only a day's march away. Any British presence east of the Oder could be interpreted as interference in Soviet operational zones. Yet Hargreaves pressed on, driven by orders from London, and by the nagging suspicion that what they sought was more than mere gold. On May 1st, while scouting a disused rail spur outside Świebodzis, Cartwright found evidence of freshly disturbed earth, and beneath it, the faint glint of steel rails leading directly into a hillside. The entrance had been sealed with concrete and camouflaged by debris. A sentry post nearby lay abandoned, its logs burned, its insignia torn away. Hargreaves ordered a perimeter sweep, his men tense, weapons ready. "Looks like they didn't want anyone finding this," Cartwright muttered, brushing dust from the rail markings. "Or maybe someone already did." As the sun dipped behind the Sudeten peaks, the men stood in silence before the sealed tunnel. The air was heavy with the scent of oil and cordite, traces of recent work. Somewhere beyond that wall, perhaps, lay the train the world had been chasing. Or perhaps nothing at all. Hargreaves stared at the hillside and spoke quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "If this is it," he said, "we've arrived too late." The next morning, they would prepare to breach the tunnel. But before they did, something, or someone, would reach them first. At dawn on May 2, 1945, the forest around Wałbrzych was eerily silent. Mist clung to the treetops, and the distant rumble of artillery had faded. A rare moment of quiet in a continent still echoing with war. Major Alastair Hargreaves and his small unit of British commandos stood before the sealed railway tunnel they'd discovered the previous evening. A concrete wall, crudely poured but reinforced with steel girders, blocked the entrance. The rail tracks beneath the rubble led straight into it. Behind that barrier, the men believed, lay the elusive gold train of the Third Reich. Lieutenant Cartwright ran his gloved hand along the edge of the wall. "Fresh work," he murmured. "Less than a month old." Sergeant McCall, the team's explosives expert, nodded. "They didn't just seal this for retreat. They buried something they didn't want found." Hargreaves gave a curt order. "Set a small charge. Enough to crack the surface, no more. We don't want to bring the mountain down." As the men worked, Hargreaves scanned the treeline. The mission had already taken them farther into disputed territory than any Allied directive would officially allow. Soviet vanguard patrols were now within 20 kilometers. If they were caught here, the British would have no explanation that wouldn't spark a diplomatic incident. Yet the discovery was too important to abandon. At precisely 7:45 hours, the charges detonated with a low, muffled thud. Dust and fragments filled the air. When the smoke cleared, the team could see what lay beyond, a narrow passageway, partially collapsed, leading into darkness. The faint odor of oil and metal hung in the air. Hargreaves ordered torches lit. "Let's see what they were hiding." Inside, the air was cold and stale. Rusted tracks extended only a few meters before vanishing under fallen rock. The walls were rough-hewn, unfinished, evidence of hasty construction. Then, something caught Cartwright's eye, a shattered wooden crate, half buried under debris. He knelt, brushing away the dirt. Faded stenciling revealed a familiar insignia, Deutsche Reichsbank, Berlin. For a moment, no one spoke. The discovery confirmed what had only been rumor until now. They had found part of the train's cargo, or at least where it had once been. Deeper in, the tunnel branched off into smaller corridors. One was flooded, another sealed by a steel door marked with German script, Nur für Sonderkommando-Zugang, authorized personnel only. McCall approached with a crowbar, but Hargreaves stopped him. Not yet. We document everything first. No mistakes. The team's signals officer, Corporal Jenkins, attempted to radio a brief coded report back to headquarters in Brussels, but the mountains interfered. "Signal's dead," he said. "We're on our own for now." Hargreaves knew the risk. They were operating in a political vacuum, neither fully authorized by SHAEF command nor acknowledged by the Soviets. What they found here could rewrite the narrative of Germany's final days. But if the Soviets discovered British forces searching for Nazi gold in their zone, the consequences could be disastrous. The men pressed deeper. Along the tunnel walls, they found more crates, some smashed open, others perfectly intact. Inside were stacks of foreign banknotes, bundles of silverware, and paintings crudely rolled and tied with twine. On one, the faint signature of a Dutch master could still be discerned through the grime. "Loot from half of Europe," Cartwright muttered. "All of it stolen." In a small alcove, they came across the body of an SS officer, still in uniform, his pistol beside him. The insignia identified him as part of the Schutzstaffel Transport Command. His notebook, written in neat Gothic script, contained a chilling final entry dated April 14, 1945. Train secured. Orders from Berlin. Conceal cargo. No surrender. If intercepted, destroy. The entry ended abruptly. The man had likely shot himself after sealing the tunnel. Hargreaves pocketed the book, evidence they would need later. "They buried it themselves," he said quietly. "And then they died with it." By midday, the team emerged from the tunnel, shaken but resolute. They had enough proof to confirm the gold train's existence, and to suggest that its full cargo might still be entombed somewhere deeper within the mountain network. But their triumph was short-lived. A distant rumble announced the arrival of a Soviet reconnaissance unit. Through binoculars, Jenkins spotted 3 T-34 tanks and a column of infantry moving along the valley road below. "They'll reach the village by nightfall," Jenkins warned. Hargreaves swore under his breath. "We can't stay. Not with them so close." The men quickly photographed the tunnel site, marked coordinates, and buried the Reichsbank crate under loose rock to conceal their presence. By the time they were ready to move, the sound of Soviet trucks was echoing up the valley. The British unit slipped back into the forest, their tracks covered, their mission half complete. That night, they took refuge in the ruins of a farmhouse overlooking the valley. Rain hammered the broken roof as they studied the dead officer's notebook by candlelight. One word appeared repeatedly in the final pages: Reese. Cartwright frowned. "Reese, that's German for giant." Hargreaves nodded. "It's more than that. Project Reese, I've seen it in the files. A massive underground construction in these mountains. Nobody knows its purpose." McCall looked up from his rifle. "Maybe that's where the rest of the train went." Outside, the distant thunder of Soviet artillery echoed again. The men understood the unspoken truth. The treasure they'd found was only a fragment, a clue to something much larger. If the rest of the gold train had been moved into Project Reese, then its secrets were now buried somewhere within miles of fortified tunnels, and perhaps already under Soviet control. As the candlelight flickered, Hargreaves closed the notebook and whispered the words that would define the next phase of their mission. "We're not leaving yet. Not until we know where this leads." May 3, 1945. The war in Europe was breathing its last, but for Major Alistair Hargreaves and his men, the mission was only deepening. The discovery of the sealed tunnel near Volbjik had confirmed the existence of Hitler's rumored gold train, Yet what they'd found was only a fraction of what intelligence reports suggested. The key to unlocking the rest of the mystery lay in one word scrawled repeatedly in a dead officer's notebook: Reese. Project Reese, meaning giant in German, had been whispered about in intelligence circles for months. Its existence had come to light only after the Allies captured a trove of documents from Organization Todt, the engineering corps responsible for Germany's grandest underground fortifications. But the purpose of Reese had never been confirmed. Some reports suggested it was intended as a last-ditch Führer headquarters, others as an industrial complex for secret weapons. None mentioned a treasure. And yet, the connection was undeniable. The SS officer's final orders referenced both the gold train and Reese in the same breath. At dawn, Hargreaves and his men moved through the mist-shrouded forests of the Owl Mountains, heading south toward Xia's castle, the heart of Reese's labyrinth. The castle loomed above the valley like a ghost of medieval power, its stone walls pockmarked by shellfire, its windows shattered. Beneath it, the British would soon discover, lay something far stranger than legend had ever described. They reached the site by midday. Soviet advance scouts had already been seen on the lower roads, but the British team, dressed in scavenged Wehrmacht fatigues and traveling light, avoided detection. Within the castle grounds, they found a series of heavy steel doors leading downward into the rock, some blasted open, others sealed tight. Signs in German still clung to the walls: Bovreben Reese, Bostel Xias. Construction Project Giant, Xia's site. Lieutenant Cartwright examined the massive air vents and generator rooms. "This isn't a fortress," he said. "It's a complex. Power, ventilation, communication lines. They were building something meant to last underground for years." Sergeant McCall nodded grimly. "Or to hide something that would never see daylight again." As they ventured deeper, the air grew damp and metallic. Water dripped from the tunnel ceilings, echoing like a heartbeat. They found deserted machinery, mine carts, and boxes labeled Krupp Stahlwerk, evidence that Germany's biggest industrial firms had been involved. Then, amid the rust and decay, they came across something that froze them in place: a narrow-gauge rail line leading directly into a sealed chamber, blocked by steel doors welded shut. The markings on the doors matched the ones from the first tunnel near Volbschik. Painted in black letters across the center was the Reichsbank emblem. This was no coincidence. "This is where it went," Cartwright whispered. "The train, or what was left of it." McCall approached the door, running a hand across the welded seams. This would take a week to cut through quietly. Hargreaves hesitated. They had neither the time nor the safety to attempt it. The Soviets were advancing rapidly, and the sound of gunfire echoed faintly from the valleys below. "We can't open it," he said, frustration in his voice. "But we can mark it. Photograph everything." For the next several hours, the men documented every detail: the rail lines, the door, the machinery. They took careful notes, measuring the tunnel dimensions, sketching diagrams. It was as if the Germans had built an underground vault large enough to swallow a train whole. Every sign pointed to a deliberate concealment effort in the war's final weeks, a systematic effort to hide assets from both the Allies and the Soviets. By late afternoon, their position had become untenable. Radio intercepts confirmed Soviet armored divisions had entered the Volbschik region. British command in Brussels ordered immediate withdrawal from all areas east of the Oder to avoid confusion of jurisdiction. But Hargreaves ignored the first transmission. He needed more time. As night fell, the men retreated to an upper chamber within the castle. Through cracks in the stone, they could see the glow of distant fires, Soviet flares marking their progress. Inside, the team reviewed what they'd found. Corporal Jenkins read aloud from the dead officer's diary again: "All assets secured in Reese. Transport complete. Awaiting destruction order from Berlin." Berlin had fallen days earlier. That destruction order had never come. The implications were staggering. If the order to destroy the gold train had not been issued, it meant the treasure, or at least part of it, might still be intact somewhere within the Reese network. The British had no authority to continue searching, yet abandoning the site would mean surrendering it to the Soviets, who would likely conceal the discovery behind the Iron Curtain for decades. Hargreaves weighed the decision. "If we leave now, it's lost forever," he said quietly. "Buried beneath their silence." Cartwright replied, "Sir, if we stay, we'll be the ones buried." For a long moment, no one spoke. The men understood the choice before them, between duty and history. By morning, the roar of T-34 engines filled the valley below. Soviet troops were setting up checkpoints on every road. Hargreaves gathered the men. "We're pulling out," he ordered. "But we're taking our records with us. Every map, every photo, every coordinate. London will decide what happens next." They left Xia's castle just before dawn, moving through side paths toward the western frontier. Behind them, the Soviets closed in on the complex. Within days, all access to the area would be sealed. Riis, and whatever lay within its tunnels, passed out of Allied reach and into Soviet hands. As they crossed back into Allied lines near Gorlitz, Hargreaves paused on a ridge overlooking the mountains. Smoke drifted from the valleys below. Somewhere in that vast network of stone and secrecy lay the truth about Hitler's lost gold. He turned to his men. "Remember this place," he said. "One day, they'll ask if it was ever real. And we'll be the only ones who know." That night, his report, coded and marked "Eyes Only," left for London. But as history would soon reveal, not all of his evidence would arrive intact. By May 7, 1945, the war in Europe was effectively over. Berlin had fallen, Hitler was dead, and the remnants of the Third Reich were surrendering across the continent. Yet for Major Alistair Hargreaves and the men of his clandestine British unit, the mission known as Operation Eclipse remained unfinished. They had uncovered irrefutable evidence that the fabled gold train had existed, and that its cargo was hidden deep within the labyrinthine tunnels of Project Riis. But before they could act, the tide of politics and power shifted sharply against them. The official telegram arrived at dawn, delivered by a Royal Signals courier at the British Forward Command Post in Gorlitz. "Cease all field operations east of the Oder River. Area designated Soviet jurisdiction under Allied occupation agreements. Immediate withdrawal required. Destruction of sensitive intelligence advised." The order bore the signature of General Frederick Morgan, Deputy Chief of Staff at SHAEF. It was not a request, it was a command. Hargreaves read the telegram twice, jaw tightening. "They're handing it over," he muttered. Lieutenant Cartwright looked up from the map table. "Sir, if we comply, the Soviets will take the site, bury it, and we'll never hear of it again." Hargreaves folded the paper, his voice cold. "That's precisely the point. This isn't about treasure anymore. It's about what they don't want the Russians to find." In the days that followed, the team was placed under strict orders to return to Allied lines and report to headquarters in Brussels for debriefing. Their field notes, photographs, and recovered items were to be sealed in a diplomatic pouch marked restricted, "Foreign Assets Recovery." But as the men packed their gear, a strange unease hung over them. Something about the recall was too abrupt, too deliberate. It was as if someone in London had decided the mission's success was now a liability. On May 8, as the world celebrated VE Day, Hargreaves sat alone in a requisitioned farmhouse, writing his final field entry. His words were terse, precise. "Gold train confirmed. Cargo likely concealed within Riis tunnels at Xia's castle complex. Evidence points to deliberate concealment by SS Transport Command. Soviet presence now dominant. Recommend containment of intelligence until post-war jurisdiction clarified." He closed the book and sealed it with wax. It would never be seen by the public. When the team reached Brussels 2 weeks later, they were met not by a hero's welcome but by a wall of silence. Their mission files were immediately classified under the Official Secrets Act. Hargreaves and his men were separated for individual debriefings that stretched for days. Questions were narrow, repetitive. Did you find physical gold? Did you make contact with Soviet units? Did you retrieve any Reichsbank materials? The tone suggested suspicion, not recognition. One by one, members of the unit were reassigned or quietly discharged. Sergeant McCall was sent to occupation duty in Hamburg. Cartwright was seconded to a civil engineering corps in Holland. Jenkins, the signals officer, vanished into intelligence work for MI6. None of them ever served together again. The mission, and its results, simply ceased to exist in official records. In London, behind the heavy doors of the Treasury's Special Assets Committee, the evidence Hargreaves had risked his life to gather was reviewed, stamped, and sealed. A memorandum dated June 2, 1945, reads, "Due to lack of corroborative proof and potential diplomatic repercussions, the alleged discovery of Reichsbank property in Silesia is to remain unacknowledged. Materials to be retained under restricted category until further notice." In other words, the truth was buried. For Hargreaves, the silence was unbearable. He had seen the crates marked with a Reichsbank seal, touched the steel of the sealed vaults beneath Xia's castle, and read the words of the SS officer who had died protecting them. Yet no one wanted to hear it. The British government was shifting rapidly from wartime unity to Cold War caution. The Soviets were now allies, and the new priority was political stability, not historical revelation. By autumn, reports began filtering back through intelligence channels. Soviet engineers had sealed off the entire Owl Mountains region, declaring it a restricted military zone. No Allied personnel were permitted entry. Villagers were relocated, rail lines dismantled, and all evidence of German construction erased. Russian geologists claimed to be conducting mineral surveys, but British agents on the ground whispered otherwise. The Soviets were excavating something. Then, in October 1945, a cryptic note reached Hargreaves through unofficial channels. It was unsigned, written on German stationery. "You were right. They found part of it. The gold has moved east." There was no way to confirm its authenticity, but Hargreaves kept the note locked in his field journal for the rest of his life. The war was over, but the silence around the gold train deepened. In the following years, mention of Operation Eclipse disappeared entirely from official military correspondence. Hargreaves himself was reassigned to administrative duties in occupied Vienna, where he rarely spoke of the mission again. His peers described him as haunted, his once sharp demeanor dulled by disillusionment. The world, meanwhile, moved on. Europe rebuilt, lines hardened, and a new kind of conflict began, one fought with intelligence and ideology instead of guns. But beneath that shifting landscape, secrets remained buried in the mountains of Silesia, protected now not by the SS, but by Soviet secrecy. In 1950, a classified MI6 review quietly revisited the Operation Eclipse files. The conclusion read simply, "Unverified. No further action." With that, the official trail ended. Unofficially, however, a handful of intelligence officers continued to wonder whether the British had, in fact, located, and perhaps even partially recovered, a portion of Hitler's hidden fortune before retreating. For Major Hargreaves, the truth was simpler and far more painful. He had followed the trail to its end, only to watch history erase it. In his private notes, later found after his death, one sentence stood out: "The gold was real. The train was real. What became of it? That, too, was buried." And so, as the Iron Curtain descended across Europe, so too did the curtain of silence over one of the war's greatest mysteries. The gold train was gone, but its shadow would linger, waiting for rediscovery in another era. Decades passed, and the world moved beyond the ashes of war. The battlefields of Silesia were reclaimed by forests, the tunnels of Project Reese filled with water and silence, and the names of the men who had once sought the gold train faded from memory. But the mystery itself refused to die. Whispers of a lost Nazi treasure buried deep beneath the mountains continued to echo through time, and through the files of governments that preferred not to acknowledge them. In 1967, over 20 years after the end of World War II, an archivist at the British National Archives in Kew came across a sealed envelope marked Operation Eclipse, restricted. Inside were a handful of photographs showing a team of British soldiers standing beside a sealed railway tunnel and a crate stenciled with the words Deutsche Reichsbank, Berlin. There was no accompanying report, no identifying names, and no record of where or when the images had been taken. Within days, the envelope disappeared back into classified storage. The legend of Major Alistair Hargreaves and his secret mission remained just that, legend. Meanwhile, across the Iron Curtain, Soviet secrecy ensured that the Owl Mountains region of Poland remained closed to outsiders. Entire villages were resettled, and Soviet engineers continued mining operations in the area until the early 1950s. Unofficially, witnesses spoke of long convoys of trucks leaving the tunnels at night, guarded by NKVD troops. No gold was ever reported found. No official documents were ever released. The mystery only deepened. In the 1970s, Western historians and journalists began to revisit the story. Polish locals told tales of explosions in the mountains after the war, of men who disappeared while digging near Ksia's castle, and of Soviet officers seen shipping heavy cargo eastward by rail. One of the earliest post-war explorers, Jerzy Czeslik, published a controversial report claiming that Allied intelligence, specifically British forces, had known about the train before the Soviets arrived. His sources were unnamed, but his description of a British commando unit operating near Volbjik in May 1945 matched precisely the forgotten Operation Eclipse. Declassified fragments from MI6 archives in the 1980s seemed to confirm portions of the story. One memorandum, dated August 1945, referenced a special field detachment of British origin, operating in Silesia, and an unconfirmed report of asset recovery from former Reichsbank transports. The file was heavily redacted, and no follow-up was listed. But for those who had studied the legend, it was proof that something extraordinary had happened, and been deliberately concealed. Then, in 1992, a revelation surfaced from an unexpected source. Following the fall of the Soviet Union, a trove of NKVD records was released in Moscow. Among them were logistical logs dated from May 1945 showing the transfer of foreign currency reserves from Lower Silesia to facilities near Minsk and Smolensk. The source location was listed cryptically as Object 52/Ries. Historians and treasure hunters alike seized upon the find, claiming it proved that the Soviets had indeed discovered the gold train's hidden cargo and secretly moved it east. But once again, no physical evidence surfaced, only more questions. By the early 2000s, the story had taken on a life of its own. Explorers with ground-penetrating radar began searching the wooded hills near Volbjik. Polish authorities, initially skeptical, were eventually drawn into the investigation when anomalies, large metallic signatures consistent with railcars, were detected deep underground. Excavations in 2015 made global headlines. Cameras rolled, politicians arrived, and the world waited. But when the tunnels were finally opened, they revealed only layers of rock and soil. No gold, no train. Just empty stone corridors echoing with disappointment. Still, the evidence of something or someone having been there remained undeniable. Modern researchers discovered reinforced shafts, sealed ventilation ducts, and remnants of wartime steel rails leading nowhere. Some experts argued that the tunnels were simply abandoned construction sites. Others insisted they were remnants of the long-lost vaults described by Hargreaves' team. Without official records, the truth lay forever out of reach. For those who delved into British archives, the deeper mystery was not what had been found, but what had been erased. Operation Eclipse appeared nowhere in official SOE war summaries. The 30 assault units' post-war logs contained a gap from late April to mid-May 1945. And among the personal effects of Ian Fleming, the famed creator of James Bond and founder of the very same $30, a single handwritten note was discovered years later: gold, Volbjik, Ries, buried under silence. Historians still debate its meaning. Some believe Fleming had been briefed about the mission's outcome and left a cryptic reference to it. Others argue it was coincidence. But within the small circle of researchers who have spent lifetimes piecing together fragments of evidence, the consensus is clear. The gold train existed, it was hidden deliberately, and both the British and Soviets played their parts in ensuring that its true fate would never be revealed. Today, the tunnels of Project Ries remain largely unexplored, their entrances blocked or collapsed, their secrets locked behind decades of earth and silence. Ksia's castle has been restored, its halls filled with tourists who walk unknowingly above what may be one of history's greatest hidden treasures. Beneath the calm beauty of the Owl Mountains, the ghosts of the past still linger. Engineers, soldiers, and the men who once tried to uncover what others had worked so hard to conceal. As for Major Alistair Hargreaves, history remembers him only in fragments: a name in a declassified memo, a blurred figure in an old photograph, a rumor whispered among archivists. His final journal entry, recovered from his estate after his death in 1962, contained a single, haunting line: "We were there first, but perhaps it was never meant to be found." And so, the legend endures, a story of greed, secrecy, and lost opportunity buried beneath layers of history and politics. The gold train of Hitler may never be uncovered, but the shadow of the mission to steal it, the secret British operation that nearly succeeded, remains one of the last great unsolved mysteries of the Second World War.